Okay, the title of this video is a little bit of clickbait, but now that you're here, welcome. I am Tol'tar of Lynn, and I am going to tell you why the Horus Heresy is not real. That is a bit of a trick statement, which will make more sense of it, I hope, by the end of this whole experience. And no, it's not a very serious video. It is, however, an exercise in applying my academic interests to a fictional world, because I'm bored and wanted to share this idea. To clarify my perspective, I'm mainly drawing on ideas from Marcia Eliade and Joseph Campbell regarding the nature of mythology and history, with a few other influences that I can't exactly identify at the moment. And also mainly because, to spite my youth, I am a particularly leathery grognard at heart. I love 4th edition, and I prefer its setting to modern 40k as of 10th edition, with some exceptions. This is because the setting as presented in 4th edition primarily functioned as a backdrop for your own characters and campaigns to take place within. There was an overall metaplot, yes, but no central characters to drive that plot. The metaplot was more the culmination of thousands of different actions and decisions scattered across the galaxy. The decline of the Imperium wasn't because of a singular villain. It is the culmination of 10,000 years of mistakes, brutal necessities, and theological development. There are notable characters and notable villains, but their own stories are more self-contained. They take place within the world rather than the world being driven by those stories. They also functioned as examples for players to draw on to construct their own characters. So, what does this have to do with the Horus Heresy? Simple. The evolution of the Horus Heresy novel series has transformed the common fandom perception of 40k. This change in narrative style has also been present in 40k since the advent of 8th edition. I believe that the two are linked. The Horus Heresy as written is not a 100% accurate depiction or recollection of events. I believe that Dan Abnett said so himself near the very beginning of writing the Heresy, that the series is not a true history, but instead a collection of the mythology of that formative period of the Imperium. Nothing exemplifies this narrative change more than the core characters of the Heresy, the Primarchs. A critique I've heard about the Heresy and its effects can be very easily summarized with this point, that the Primarchs as presented in the Horus Heresy turn 40k into Marvel Comics, where the focus of the narrative is no longer the world, but the characters in it, and more so, the characters and their impact upon the world. Plus, you also get passionate discussions on who can beat up who at what period of time. Prior to the writing of the Horus Heresy, the Primarchs functioned as mythological figures, and I still believe this is the function they best serve. The reality of who and what they are is lost to the tide of history and the mythic archetypes that they have come to embody after 10,000 years of propaganda, lost records, and myth-making. This goes for all the Primarchs, even the traitors. For example, the seemingly inevitable evil of the traitor Primarchs may be a retroactive demonization of them in Imperial culture and mythology. Of course they would turn traitor. Look how obviously evil they are. Of course Mortarion would turn evil. Look how disgusting and stinky he is. The real historical Mortarion may not have even been how he is depicted in the Heresy, but this depiction of it as a bloated, sickly man comes about because of his legion's fall to Nurgle, and his own transformation. The mythology makes his fall to Nurgle more palatable in that he was inherently flawed from the very start, and his treachery was seemingly inevitable. On the flip side, the loyalist Primarchs reflect the opposite of this. For example, Sanguinius in reality may have been a brutal and vampiric general who was feared as a monster by Imperial citizens. His beauty, as presented artistically, is a deliberate deification because of his sacrifice in the name of the Imperium's god, the Emperor. This completely obscures what he may have been in historical reality. For example, the mythology around Sanguinius during the Imperium's early post-heresy era, let's say during the Age of Scouring, for example, may have been very different. He may have been venerated for a heroic sacrifice, atoning for the horrors he inflicted upon the peoples he conquered. However, if you fast forward a few thousand years, with the emergence and widespread popularity of the Church of the God Emperor, the mythology around Sanguinius changed, and he became a Primarch that was always a beautiful angelic figure who was honorable and pragmatic. In this instance, the older, arguably more historically accurate version of events, at best falls out of popularity, and at worst is burned as outright heretical and traitorous to not only the Church, but the Blood Angels chapter. Meaning that the original version not only fades from popular consciousness, but is actively erased. Dorn may not have actually been a stalwart or hyper-defensive person, but because he was the only Primarch left to defend Terra and managed those defenses well during the siege, he became synonymous in galactic imperial culture with stalwart defense. His own chapter would incorporate and become influenced by this very mythology, using it as a foundation for the chapter's emergent culture after the legions disbanded. Okay, before you retort, but the stories of Dorn from before the defense of Terra always paint him as a stalwart, stubborn defender focused wholly on blah 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 blah. I will reiterate. Those stories may be later constructions that have been retroactively applied to the character of Dorn to narratively and mythologically align him with the role he played in the Siege of Terra. In effect, he didn't become the sole defender of Terra because he was a defensive Primarch, but he has been characterized as a defensive Primarch because he was the only one left to manage those defenses. In essence, the historical Dorn has been wholly subsumed into the mythological Dorn. The reality of the person is lost, and all that is left is the myth, the legend, and the propaganda. The characters of the Primarchs, as depicted in the art and narratives of the Heresy era, are their mythological archetypes, retroactively constructed with each retelling of the heresy, formed after thousands of years of mythology, administratum, or ecclesiastical doctoring of history. The loyalists become sanctified because they remained loyal, instead of remaining loyal because they were inherently better than the traitors. Those positive traits that have been assigned to them culturally are a result of their loyalty to the regime, whereas the traitor Primarchs become demonized because they turned against the regime. Another example that can highlight what I mean is this image of Leman Russ from the Rogue Trader 1st edition rulebook, right? This could very well be the true historical Russ, with the beautiful, swarthy, barbarian hero of the Heresy era being his mythological and propagandized image, an archetype of a brutal yet complex warrior that has, both intentionally and by design, completely subsumed the reality of who Russ was, becoming heroes that the Space Marines ground their entire martial culture around, embodying the collective culture of their chapter over thousands of years. The image of the Primarchs are more so the collective mythologies. The image of the Primarchs are more so the collective mythologies and deities and representations of their chapters, rather than being accurate recollections of who they actually were. We see the same process in reality. Heroes and great figures of history inevitably become something more than the human that they were, as the memory of their human life and their human flaws fades with time, until the human themselves becomes totally subsumed into the character and the myth that is formed around them. They have attained a form of immortality, a form of cultural apotheosis, but it is not them, the human, that is immortal, but it is instead the archetype they embodied in life. The Horus Heresy may not have even happened. It is instead a narrative of myth and mistrust, deliberately coagulated and constructed over 10,000 years of time as both a national epic and careful propaganda, designed to justify the Imperium's regime. Of course, I'm mostly spiraling at this point from the idea from a bullshit iceberg meme that had a line saying the Horus Heresy happened in another timeline. I can't find it, but that's where part of this idea came from. This leads to an interesting alternative, right? What would a real Primarch returning resemble? What were they like historically? Like, for example, what if, Robute Guilliman wakes up and is completely different to the mythologized character that the Ultramarines think he is? And, of course, what's his reaction to the Imperium and this image of him that's been created over so many years? Even the whole Primarchs lost across the galaxy shtick sounds like a mythological justification to add to the reuniting the galaxy narrative of the early Imperium. It is a propagandistic epic narrative used as part of the wider tapestry of romantic imagery constructed by the Emperor to give humanity something to fight for, and more importantly, to make them love it. Okay, that's basically all I wanted to say. Sadly, none of what I said is necessarily true or intentional. Games Workshop and the fandom have taken its own mythology and retelling as gospel, as an absolute truth. Or at least that's part of my opinion. I don't necessarily believe that in its entirety. I guess there's a bit of irony in all this. Okay, so for the next video, I'm thinking about talking more about chaos, alternative interpretations of chaos as the representative of ultimate anti-authoritarianism with all its flaws and failings. Think about even rebelling against the absolute authority of reality itself. Reality is, at its foundation, a set of laws that restrict and define the absolute. If one would seek to break free of all authority, to be truly free, to be emancipated from the tyranny of reality itself that narrowly defines what you can and cannot be at a very foundational level, if you seek to be the ultimate exultant of freedom, then it's chaos all the way, baby. Or I could be ranting about the novelization of the Alien films. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to start making videos about, if I will at all. Anyways, I have been Tol'tar of Lynn, and thank you for watching.